Hi, I'm Jared Lingle.
And I'm Lucas Gubala. We're both avid Dungeons & Dragons players as well as Dungeon Masters.
And today, we're looking at role-playing anywhere through the Eye of the Beholder. Alright, Lucas, so what is Dungeons & Dragons?
What is Dungeons & Dragons? Well, it is a pen and paper role-playing system that allows you to become characters that you normally wouldn't be able to. Like, you can be an orc or a tiefling, which is a half-demon, and you can be a wizard or a cleric, and you get to play these games and make choices as you do it.
Right. The way I always describe it anytime someone asks me what Dungeons & Dragons is, I always try to explain it like adult imagination. Like, you know, when you were a kid and you guys would play spies or some sort of game where each of you is playing a different character. It's like that, but for adults, and they ended all the arguing that you had as a kid by putting rules in and saying, here's what's possible, here's what's not possible, here's how you decide what's going to happen when something is up for debate.
The adult aspect of being bashed over the head with rules.
Right.
Is,
and battle axes.
Oh, naturally, yes.
Yeah.
Some shield bashes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a very apt description, that it targets that imagination center of your brain, and you're able to become a whole nother person sometimes.
Right.
Well, how did you personally get into Dungeons & Dragons, Jared?
Well, I was in theater in high school, and there was one specific production where I had to stand inside of a pillar of the set, like a set piece, for about half an hour while I was waiting to do my job. And a good friend of mine named Brendan was in there, and he would spend that whole half an hour every night talking to me about Dungeons & Dragons and all the crazy stories that he had from the games at his house. And I thought it was pretty nerdy and pretty boring. Didn't really care about it. But the information intrigued me and sparked intrigue much later on. About 3 or 4 years later, I was over at a friend's house, and he had mentioned before that he had played some Dungeons & Dragons in the past, and so there was a group of us there, and I asked him, hey, what do you think about us giving Dungeons & Dragons a go? And he said, all right. We started playing. It was a horrible experience. I was forced to be the cleric, even though I wanted to be the wizard. And after 3 sessions, I decided, you know what? I'm going to stop complaining, and I'll be the DM.
Take charge, take matters into your own hands.
Yeah.
Little thing that I didn't actually know, I think we were introduced to Dungeons & Dragons by the same person.
Oh, really?
Yes, Brendan, who was involved with your theater program, was actually my first introduction to Dungeons & Dragons as well. Early in middle school, he tried to get a group of people together to play some 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. The current edition is 5th, for anybody who's curious. And we, a bunch of friends came together, and his father dungeon mastered for us, and we had a grand old time for a couple months, and then things, fizzled out. It's tough to keep a group of 5 or 6 people going, but I had a wonderful time, and it kind of slipped away until later on in high school when we started playing together.
Yeah. What a time that was.
Oh, what a time to be alive. High school and Dungeons & Dragons. You know we were the cool kids.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, Lucas, why is it so easy to start Dungeons & Dragons?
I think part of the reason that it's such an accessible game for so many people is the tools that you need are so readily available in this day and age, because you can play. It's like playing Spies and Robbers or whatever when you're a kid. Is you don't need much.
Yeah.
For Dungeons and Dragons, pencil and paper, and you can figure it out. There are online resources available through Dungeons and Dragons website that give you the base rules, and those are available for free.
Yeah.
And once you have those, you can take them and run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there are also dice apps on your phone that can manage everything, and spell books as well. I personally use an online application for my spell book when I play things like clerics or wizards when you have too many spells to keep track of.
Yeah. And as far as having friends goes, what do you do if you don't have any friends to play Dungeons & Dragons with?
As the expert on having no friends, as the local friendless Dungeons & Dragons player,
yeah,
I know there are options locally for game places that's put on a thing called the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures League. If I
Yeah, at your local game shop, yeah.
Yeah, I personally have not attended one, but I've heard stories and I've talked to people who have attended them, and they generally seem to be a pleasurable experience. They are kind of built campaigns that people can be dropped in or dropped out of as the drop of a hat, so you can show up and learn to play, and hopefully everybody's really supportive of you learning. You know, it varies on a case-by-case basis, but I think they're open for experienced players and new players alike.
Yeah. And as far as if there isn't a game shop nearby, there are online resources for you to get a group together. For instance, the subreddit r/LFG, which stands for Looking for a Group. You can post on there or look for posts in your area. People who want to play Dungeons and Dragons, because there are a lot of them, and they don't have enough people in their group, or they're a new DM and they are looking for players, or you want to DM and you're looking for players.
There are constantly people that are unsatisfied, just like you were, looking for sheep for themselves to lead to a better play experience.
Indeed. Then also you have websites like meetup.com, which isn't D&D focused, but you can absolutely use that to find a group of people to play with.
Yeah, I've used it for a board game group that I've had a great time with, and it's very applicable. I see Dungeons and Dragons groups on there all the time.
All right. And then also, as far as the accessibility of it, what if your friend moves away and you still want to play Dungeons and Dragons? What if the people that you meet up with, they're just too far, schedule's too busy? How do you solve that?
Well, since it is imaginary, you can play in the theater of the mind and use many voice-connected services online, like Skype or Discord or TeamSpeak. You can use numerous numbers of programs to communicate with your friends, and there are online applications that are built to facilitate play. And I know that people use things like Roll20 to simulate a Dungeons and Dragons game. People also use things like Tabletop Simulator, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is a game on Steam. You can move around your characters. It's actually pretty cool. There's also a flip table button. So,
I've never played it, but I've definitely seen the page for it on Steam.
Yeah, a dungeon master that is willing to put in the work will be able to set up a suitable Dungeons and Dragons experience with a simulated table for their avid adventurers. But
okay.
No, go please.
So for your first game, as a player, what kind of preparation should you do before you show up to the first session?
Well, I think for your very first session, you should make sure you know somebody that is going to be able to help you with the information. I think that's the most important part. Being able to read a book, because there is a book that you will eventually want to read. It's not that long. Do you actually know how many pages it is, roughly?
In the player's handbook?
Yes.
I'm unsure. It's somewhere between 200 and 300 pages.
Yeah, and you don't need to read all of it, but skimming through a lot of it is a good way to get informed about the game and the general rules, so that when you show up, you're not a total novice. But having someone there to help you is incredibly important.
Right. Also, the basic rules, which you can download for free as opposed to buying the book off of dnd.wizards.com. And on there, you can take a look at those basic rules, which are much, much fewer in pages. And through that, you are able to learn the basic rules that you need to know for your first session.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to ask questions about people. There are so many intricacies to this game that it's going to be impossible. I have been playing for quite some time now, and I still ask questions, mainly to you.
Yeah.
All the time.
That's okay. I've, memorized everything.
Oh yeah, you're just you're D&D superhero.
Yeah. I prefer human encyclopedia, but that's fine.
Well, as somebody that has shepherded many a new player through the world of Dungeons and Dragons, what are some common pitfalls that you see people fall into?
Well, I have shepherded through the valley of hell. Probably about 30 people, I would say, I have introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. And I would say the most common pitfall is treating it like it's an improv game, like an actor's improv game. And I know that you don't have really any acting experience, but there's a rule in improv games when you are an actor, which is yes and. And basically what that means is that at any point, anyone in the game can add something to the structure of the scene or the world, and everyone else accepts it, and that continues on and is part of the universe that you are all pretending to exist in. But in Dungeons & Dragons, only one person at the table is allowed to do that, and that is the Dungeon Master. And so oftentimes new players will, for instance, let's say you're in a tavern, right? Mm-hmm. And they say, all right, I walk up to this attractive chick and I start telling her these things. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I never told you that there was an attractive chick here. And they say, oh, well, I'm sorry. I just thought it was that sort of game where you can, improvise. And what's important to know is that the Dungeon Master acts as the senses for the player. Anything that you can see, touch, taste, hear, smell, all of those things are presented to you by the Dungeon Master. So if you are looking for something specific, like an attractive chick at the tavern, what I would do as the player is say to the Dungeon Master, are there any attractive chicks here? I'm looking for an attractive female. Are there any of those present?
Are there any attractive females around?
And so that's usually the avenue that I prefer players go down, but that is absolutely the most common stumbling block that I've seen in new players.
And then you walk outside and they're like, and my giant pet dragon comes and picks us all up and we fly away. And adding things to the story is an easy pitfall to fall into, but I completely agree. The Dungeon Master is the senses and in the end is the decider of what happens in the game. And I think it is important to respect the Dungeon Master because while they are... It is a common thing to view the Dungeon Master as an adversary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's us versus him.
Yeah, it is.
Her.
Or her. And, but it is not so. Everybody is working together to create a fun experience and an awesome story.
Absolutely.
And the Dungeon Master is doing what they're doing for a reason and being antagonistic because of it. Especially when you carry that out of the game world and you become annoyed with the Dungeon Master for doing something because you rolled badly is not a really good attitude to have. So I would say coming into the game with a good attitude about having fun and creating a cool story with your friends or the people that you've met at an Adventurers League, I think is really important as far as mindset goes. And I've certainly had days, I think I was DMing a campaign for you, where I've just been out of it, and it's sometimes hard. You got to be in a mental space for it and be prepared because working that Imagitorium, it takes up a lot of brain power.
Yeah, in the mindscape. Speaking of rolling, actually, the second most common pitfall that I see players fall into is not knowing which die is which is a very common mistake because there are 7 of them.
Oh, yes.
Most people are only used to the 6-sided die, and the D20 they only know as a dodecahedron from geometry.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So I cannot tell you how many times I have heard new players say, so which die do I roll?
Well, to answer that question.
Yeah, which die do you roll,
For
Lucas?
all the questioning players out there, most of the time, the D20.
The D20, 95% of the time.
95% of the time. Because this is a D20 system that Dungeons & Dragons operates on. So that means whenever you want to do something, see, smell, perceive anything...
That has a chance of failure.
That has a chance of failure that your DM will tell you to roll. You're going to roll the D20.
Right.
The only exceptions are when you have rolled a D20 and you're attacking things and you are rolling for damage. And that varies depending on the weapon that you're using. Absolutely.
Anytime you hear the DM say, check, saving throw, anytime that they use those words, anytime you hear the DM say, check, or saving throw, fair chance you'll be using a D20.
Yeah. And I was guilty of it when I first started as well. I'd be like, which one do I roll? You're like the 21, they grab the one with 12 sides. And then
no, the one with the most number of sides.
Yeah, the most numbers. Like, but this one is, has 12. And they're like, I rolled a 4. I'm like, well, that's a D4.
So why is it so fun? Why are so many people hooked on this?
Personally, I know why it appealed to me. I live my life in a very structured way. I'm very organized. I have checklists for almost everything that I do. And being able to kind of sit down and completely become a different person in my mind and role play and just have fun with my friends is really appealing to me. And I have a great time doing it. I know that not everybody enjoys the game, but I think most people that give it a shot tend to understand why it is so appealing to people.
Yeah.
And that's the main reason for me,
Mm-hmm.
that I just get to forget about all my troubles for a couple hours, sometimes more than a couple hours if we're running a long campaign. But I get to just relax and have a great time with my friends. And some people do that by playing video games. Some people do that by, drawing together. There's a whole gamut of things that people do. And I think Dungeons and Dragons is a really fun, creative way to have fun with your friends.
Yeah. I have not once, in all of the people that I've introduced to D&D, I have never once had someone get up from the table after the session was over and say, I hated that. I did not have a good time. I'm never going to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
They've entirely, 100% of the time, been positive. Not always loving, right? There have been times where someone said, you know what? This isn't for me, but I had fun, and I see why you guys love it so much.
Yeah.
For some people, they are more introverted, and they prefer activities that are by themselves, which I totally understand, and it's not for them. But for the vast majority of people that I've introduced, they have all loved it exceptionally.
Jared batting 100 over here.
Yeah.
No, I do have several friends that are rather introverted, and many of them play Dungeons and Dragons. But what I've found is that for those people that don't necessarily enjoy the role playing and the communication aspect of it, at its core, because of those rules that have been implemented,
it's a game.
It is a game. It is a systems-based game. So you can min and max to your heart's content, which I know I really enjoy doing, going through the book, poring over. I know we have spent one session, how many hours was it?
8 hours.
Making a single character for me, because I want to read over everything. I want to make sure that I am using the system to its fullest extent. And I know a lot of people that really like that, because games that do that, like RimWorld or like Civilization or even like StarCraft, where you're min-maxing,
mm-hmm.
I think if you enjoy games where you're optimizing something, I think you can find something that you'll enjoy in Dungeons and Dragons, for sure.
Yeah, the moment swords come out, spellbooks come out, the moment combat begins, it's still a role-playing game, but it is a turn-based strategy game from that point until the end of combat.
And I know that you are not the biggest fan of combat.
Well, I just love the role-playing so much. I love the character interactions, and combat just takes so long, especially when you have a large group of people. The combat's a 5-minute combat in-game could take several hours in real life, and oftentimes our sessions, if they include a combat that's long, the entire session might be 10 hours, and it feels a little long for me, and so I prefer the interaction between players much more.
On the other side of the coin, I rather enjoy the combat, because I do like those systems, and I like having miniatures on the map, and I like seeing the cones of where spells are going to get cast and stuff like that, because if you don't know, Dungeons and Dragons can have a physical component. A lot of people think that it is just pencil and paper, which it can completely be played with. It can be played entirely in your head, but people also have miniatures and maps that they can put down.
What's a miniature?
Miniatures are little figurines that can represent players, potentially tokens. Think about like a board game piece in like Sorry or Life. It represents your character and where you are on a map.
Got it.
Yeah. But there's also a physical aspect of it. And I love that, and I love the combat because of it, because I find it very mentally enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And I like going through that process. And while it can be a little bit draining to have 5 hours of combat, if you're having fun while you're doing it, I don't see the problem. But it can definitely be draining on a dungeon master, especially keeping track of so many different things.
I absolutely agree. And here's the thing. Here's the funny juxtaposition that I find myself in. I enjoy combat when I am playing. I find combat to be such a slog when I'm the DM.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I'm a player, I have every other person's turn to be strategizing, thinking about synergies between our abilities, looking for weaknesses in our opponents. But when I am the dungeon master and I'm running a combat encounter, it feels like the antagonistic portion of the game, like that is when those feelings come out. That is the prime time for players to feel like they're being unjustly targeted for something, and that those type of feelings are very difficult to be brought up during the social interaction portion of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't really like controversy at the table between the real life players. I don't mind the player characters, but
yeah, we're all trying to have fun. No, I completely get that. And bringing it back around to new players who are interested in Dungeons and Dragons, that's an important dynamic, is knowing what your dungeon master enjoys doing, and if they like focusing on the social aspect or if they enjoy the combat more.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't necessarily mesh with your play style. Maybe don't discount Dungeons and Dragons if you try it and you have a DM that wants to do 6 hours of hard combat and you don't get to roleplay at all, because there are many, many different types of players.
Yeah.
And that is something that we could potentially cover in the future about the different types of players, because I know me and you approach the game very differently, as we discussed.
Yeah.
And there are more types than just us.
I mean, if I took my impression of Dungeons and Dragons as a whole from my first 3 sessions, I would hate Dungeons and Dragons because I really hated my time when I was playing that, because my Dungeon Master sucked really bad and I hated it. So, absolutely. Because it is a collaborative storytelling game, it's all about the people that you're playing with. And sometimes you're bringing your A game and other people are dragging the story down, and that's not the game's fault, right?
It is not the game's fault. I agree. On the topic of becoming a new player and potentially dungeon master, I want to make sure that people who are listening understand that it's not impossible if you can't find any Adventures League games near you. It's not impossible to start as a dungeon master and get your friends together. It is difficult. I'm not going to lie. You have to read a lot more and understand the rules fundamentally. But if you and your friends can't find another outlet to play and you really want to try Dungeons and Dragons out, there are plenty of people that dungeon master themselves and learn with their friends as you go.
Yep.
And it's not an impossible route. I think if that is what you think is best for your friends in your group and you want to learn together, you should go for it.
Yeah, I only played 3 sessions as a player before I had my first session as the Dungeon Master, and from that point forward, I didn't play again for another year or so. So was that like 40 or 50 different sessions where I played as the Dungeon Master, learning the rules, planning games all behind the scenes, and, fundamentally learning the rules with the players alongside them.
You get dungeon masteritis when nobody wants you to be a player because you're such a good DM.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
It could happen to you.
Yeah.
That could be you not getting to play the game that you love.
Yeah, I love playing so much more than I love DMing, and I cannot tell you how many times my friends have said, but you're so good. I'm like, well, I have about 100 more sessions under my belt than you do.
I don't think I've ever said that, Jared. I've never stroked your ego. How could I? I, on the other hand, actually enjoy DMing more than playing. So there are different types of people. Some people like to be in control. Some people like to play. You just got to figure out what appeals to you. But as a new player coming in, part of what is kind of daunting is the ability to do anything. The game kind of lays it out.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit where
choice paralysis.
They give you an example in the book in 5e, which is the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, of like an example of you're standing at the top of a stairwell and you want to get down. You could walk down the stairs, or you could run, or you could jump, or you could jump to the top of the stairs and hold your shield under you like a surfboard and surf down the stairs.
Wow, I've never thought of that.
Yeah, and you can do it. You just have to declare that that's what you want to do, and usually your dungeon master will tell you what to roll, and that might vary game to game.
Yeah,
but
sometimes it won't require a roll.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes the DM will deem that your character would be able to do that anyway. Maybe not with the surfing down the stairs. That's gonna be,
it's a little difficult.
Yeah, but you could play, a surfer bro, a beach dwarf. That's, yeah. Well, how do you deal with choice paralysis personally?
As a player or as a DM?
As a player.
Well, I have several years of improv acting experience, so very, very few times have I experienced choice paralysis, but it definitely even happens to me. And oftentimes what I will do when I have choice paralysis is assume that it's because I don't have enough information about the situation. So if I think, oh my goodness, I have no idea what to do, oftentimes I will say, hey, could you mind describing the situation one more time? Or, what are the items on the table? Or I will go through what items or what abilities my teammates have, and oftentimes running through all of those possibilities will spark something in my head that will provide me with an idea.
Yeah, and oftentimes if you don't fully understand what you should be doing as a player, there's a chance that the other players around you don't necessarily know what they're doing. So giving the DM a chance to expand on the world that they're kind of creating for you and put more information in to kind of nudge the story in one direction or give you guys some sort of semblance of an idea of what you need to do is really helpful for the DM and the players, because it helps everybody kind of get into the story more and understand. So don't be afraid to investigate your surroundings and gather more data. I think that's a really good strategy of overcoming what you need to do. As far as like combat goes, some people don't know what to do, and when faced with like long form combat, they just attack over and over and over again. But bearing in mind that you can make the same kind of checks in combat that you can make out of combat.
Yeah.
So if you want to try to backflip off that wall or ride down a